my fellow speakers for coming and to the audience for joining. This is an important event, a somewhat technical topic, but I think with potential ramifications that will be really important for many years to come. One of the most politically polarized areas of domestic policy is environmental regulation and energy regulation. But there is, or at least there should be, an important exception to this, which is the area of permitting reform. And that is an area where we have seen substantial bipartisan consensus on the need for permitting reform, on the need to accelerate permitting, on the need to make the permitting of infrastructure more predictable for investors and for developers, and the need to reduce the cost to the taxpayer of the enormous amount of red tape that goes into permitting. The United States does not lead the world in efficiency of its permitting and environmental review. It may well be last in the industrialized world when it comes to the efficiency for getting permits for road building, for energy infrastructure projects, and this is a major competitive disadvantage. The Chinese Communist Party exerts a degree of control over businesses in China that's unknown in the rest of the developed world, but the actual regulatory burdens are often much lower, right? And it takes much less time to get things built in many countries than in the United States. One area where, so in the Trump administration, where I served as Associate Director for Regulatory Reform at the White House Council on Environmental Quality, we were building on efforts that had begun during the Obama administration or even earlier, thinking of FAST 41, the FAST Act. And why is there this bipartisan consensus? Because there's a general recognition that unless you're just like an anti-development advocacy group, nobody can get what they want really under the current system. If you're all in on renewable energy, even if it were theoretically possible to get to net zero, we're not going to get there under the current permitting system because solar projects and wind projects and battery projects cannot get their permits quickly enough to be able to deploy at the scale that would be necessary. And if you're worried about looming energy scarcity crisis that we're facing in the United States and in Europe and in much of the world, we're not going to be able to do anything about that unless we can build out baseload capacity and the energy generation capacity that we need much more quickly than we have now. And one of the biggest problems in this, the problem takes a long time, the process takes a long time. It involves a lot of paperwork burdens, but if you ask investors in infrastructure what the biggest problem is, they will tell you that it's uncertainty in the process. And the inability to predict, they've now spent $25 million on the permit application for their solar plant, just the pre-application phase. Is the agency even going to call them back? What year of our Lord is the agency ever going to call them back? They have no idea. And so this is a problem because, and hopefully we'll get into this a little bit, 100 years ago, Frank Knight, University of Chicago economist, talked about distinguished between two different kinds of uncertainty. One that he characterized as quantifiable uncertainty, which he said can be insured and can be financed. And the other is unquantifiable uncertainty. And I think it's fair to say that the lack of data about the projects that enter pre-application, we know how many get environmental impact statements and permits based on environmental impact statements because those get published by EPA and in Notice of Availability in the Federal Register. But how many projects that enter pre-application and that go through pre-clearance at the different agencies that file all their resource reports, enormous investment, by the way, of time and resources, how many of these things ever get their permits eventually? This is a huge unknown, right? And it shouldn't be. And so one thing that we stressed in the Trump administration was that we need to have not just greater accountability, but just in general greater data gathering. And so this is something that I worked on with my colleague Mike Drummond, who is now the Director for Permitting and Innovation at the White House Council on Environmental Quality and was at that time Deputy Director for NEPA. And it represents a line of effort that goes back many years and which was taken up in the Fiscal Responsibility Act that required CEQ and appropriated a significant sum of money for CEQ to conduct a study on digital tools for modernizing NEPA. We're fortunate to have Mike Drummond here today to talk about this report, which he helped lead the formulation of. And so with that, I'll welcome you to the stage and take it away. After Mike has had his comments, we will sit with a panel up on stage. Thank you, Mike.
Good morning. Thanks for being here today, and for those of you online, thanks for joining virtually. As Mario mentioned, my name's Michael Drummond. I serve as the Director for Permitting Innovation at the Council on Environmental Quality, and wanted to thank you all for hosting this event today. As Mario mentioned, improving the permitting process is a very hot topic, and what I will be talking about today is a bit of a niche element of that. Been working under the last 3 administrations at CEQ on essentially the implementation of the permitting process. So whatever the rules of the road might be, we need to be able to work with our agency colleagues across the many agencies that might touch a particular project to effectively implement whatever the law is. And in particular, my focus has turned to technology in recent years in my new capacity at CEQ, and joined by one of my colleagues, Jordan Eccles, who is with us on the technology and innovation team. He comes through a Presidential Innovation Fellowship program where we're bringing in kind of expertise from the private sector around technology and digital transformation, and bring the lessons from the private sector to bear on the work of our permitting agencies. So what I'll be talking about today is summary of what was in our report to Congress that Mario mentioned, as called for by the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and really gets into kind of the implementation of the permitting process. I'm also excited to hear from our panelists here in a few minutes on their concepts and ideas for how we can improve the way that we permit infrastructure projects. A bit more on my background. Mario mentioned that we collaborated in the last term of the Trump administration at CEQ. I was there on the NEPA team from 2013 to 2020. Spent some time in the private sector working on permitting, as well as at the Department of Transportation before returning to CEQ. So in order to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the permitting process, we're going to need to leverage technology in ways that we have not done before. Mario mentioned the need to kind of aggregate data and have a kind of situational awareness of what's going on at agencies so that we know how to target reforms and properly use resources to resolve bottlenecks that will, in fact, speed up the process and not just feed other bottlenecks later in the process. Worked when I was at CEQ in the 2017-2018 timeframe on the first report on environmental impact statement timelines. And one thing to note about that was, one, it was difficult for us to aggregate the data. We were doing it manually, searching the Federal Register and agency websites for the necessary inputs for that EIS timeline report. But even when we had accomplished that, it really only represents approximately 1% of all the environmental reviews that are done. Most reviews are environmental assessments or categorical exclusions, and there really isn't, with some notable exceptions of a few agencies like the Department of Energy and Department of Transportation that do post some of that data. It's not done comprehensively across the government. So we know that there are tools that can help agencies do their jobs better. One important one being applicant portals, where applicants can submit information, and then this information can be shared across agencies. What we found as we examined technology is that these are not technological impediments. We don't need to solve the technology problem and invent some new, heretofore unknown solution. It's really an implementation challenge. We need to get the tools that already exist in the private sector that folks use on a day-to-day basis into the hands of agencies in a way that actually works for all involved. This will also include platforms so that agencies can communicate with the affected public, collaboration platforms for the agencies to coordinate with their state partners as well as local and tribal entities that are part of the review process. And then when it comes to actively reviewing, especially these smaller scale actions, I mentioned the vast majority of projects that are processed as categorical exclusions, screening tools where applicants can better design and cite projects so that they know that if they comply with certain requirements and cite their projects appropriately, that they can be on a fast track for approval. And then screening tools, or rather assessment tools on the agency side so that they can rapidly conduct the review and process the approvals of those projects, all while tracking this in a way that's both publicly accessible and accessible to decision makers. Mario mentioned that CEQ was tasked by Congress in the Fiscal Responsibility Act with conducting a study and submitting a report to Congress on the potential for technology to improve the efficiency, transparency, and public engagement of the NEPA process. We didn't really stop there. We also looked at the associated permitting processes. You're rarely doing NEPA reviews in a vacuum. You also have an Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, a variety of other processes that you need to comply with, and we don't want to focus just on the NEPA process. This exercise gave us an opportunity to kind of deeply understand how we can best improve the functionality for those kind of three main stakeholder groups: applicants, agency staff, and the public. And Congress specified those three entities as well as kind of a host of features that a hypothetical tool should provide. So when we looked at on the applicant side, it's really about how they can get required information to the federal agencies. On the agency side, it's primarily about collaboration, so that when you have those multiple agencies involved in a particular project, they are sharing information, and they're not doing it via email, and they're not tracking it on an Excel spreadsheet, which unfortunately is too often the case. And then giving them the ability to easily make information public facing, so that they're not spending inordinate amounts of time doing kind of necessary public comment periods and other things, but instead have efficient tools to accomplish those. So one of the steps that we took in the course of developing our report was we hosted the first ever convening of agency officials, professionals from the environmental consultant community and IT sectors to discuss how software and other tools can deliver reviews better and more efficiently. So this was a year ago, this past October, and we did it jointly here at CEQ with the White House Office of Management and Budget and the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council. So this is the first event of that nature, and really helped feed into the report we were writing. We included both federal and state agency staff. We had the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, which had recently developed an online permitting portal there to discuss their work. I think over the course of the day, we had about 30 different sessions sharing information from various federal agencies, but also academia. There's several universities that have been involved with working on improving permitting processes, including the University of Arizona, which had used machine learning technology to aggregate and create a searchable database. And all of this fed into the study that we conducted. As part of that summit, the Permitting Council announced that it would make $25 million available to modernize permitting-related software at various federal agencies, and a little bit more on what some of those agencies are up to later in my remarks. But the goal here was to spur innovation and get these conversations started. So prior to the summit, we had already begun reaching out to agencies, learning from and demoing different tools that already exist, because there is quite a bit that agencies have done. There's a lot more that we need to do, primarily around getting these systems interconnected, right? Agencies tend to be developing their own solutions somewhat in a silo, and they're not necessarily communicating across the divide between the agencies. So based on the lessons that we had learned and the conversations we had, we wanted to share that experience with others that were involved in similar work, because we noticed that agencies were not necessarily sharing their best practices. So when one agency, Fish and Wildlife Service, has developed a tool called Information for Planning and Consultation, IPAC. But essentially, for certain Endangered Species Act consultations, you can conclude your consultation in this online tool. So you would go in, you would identify where your project is, and at the, if you meet certain requirements, these are essentially what people might know as programmatic agreements or programmatic consultations that have existed for many years on paper. They've essentially digitized that process, put logic in the system and behind the scenes, and as you go through and answer a series of questions, you can receive a PDF at the end of the process on Fish and Wildlife Service letterhead saying that you've completed consultation for your project without really ever having interacted with a human. And there's a lot of work that has gone on behind the scenes to make that possible, but we talked about what did it take for the Fish and Wildlife Service to actually develop that tool and implement it properly. And what was happening behind the scenes is they had an entire software delivery team. And it wasn't massive. It was 6 to 10 individuals. But it was an in-house software delivery team at a federal agency, which was somewhat unique in what we saw. And we wanted to make sure that other agencies that were trying to solve these similar problems had that expertise and understand and could talk to their partners across the federal government. So I mentioned that before and then after the summit, we spoke with many different individuals, demoed over 30 systems to understand what technology was out there. This gave us a really solid understanding of the current use of technology, as well as where the best opportunities lie to leverage technology to improve reviews in the future. And this was what we summarized in recommendations in our report to Congress that we released this summer. One note on some of the additional resources we pulled on, the federal government has a few different pockets of kind of digital technology innovation experts. One is at the Office of Management and Budget as the U.S. Digital Service. They've been around for about 10 years. Another is at the General Service Administration, known as 18F, which is in a larger office called the Technology Transformation Service. And these were two kind of integral partners for us, U.S. Digital Service and 18F, as we needed to bring on additional capacity so that we could kind of understand what the technology hurdles were from individuals and offices that had worked with dozens of agencies across the federal government on delivering large technology projects. So we worked with both 18F and U.S. Digital Service in the development of the report, and it's available on NEPA.gov and as well as CEQ's website, and essentially provides recommendations on how to improve permitting technology to achieve a vision of both interoperable agency systems as well as a unified user experience for public agencies and applicants. A few notable immediate steps that the report recommends. One is creating a data standard and taxonomy for NEPA. So essentially, defining what are the different data fields that are going to be necessary in any given system. And I think that CEQ is kind of uniquely positioned to do this within the federal government. I mentioned that agencies have essentially been out on their own developing systems over the past 10 to 20 years, and they don't. It's not a bad that they've been doing it that way, but it doesn't lead us down a road where we can really leverage interoperability. And what we need to do in order to achieve that interoperability is have some level of standardization in terms of what data is being collected, so that those systems can talk to each other. Once we have that standard, then develop a common architecture that'll facilitates that interoperability. Along the way, the agencies are likely going to need support in adopting this data standard. So providing that often will be financial as well as in-house technology expertise, and doing this in a iterative fashion. Agencies are not going to go from where they are currently to a fully functioning system that completes every feature that we have on our drawing board. Instead, we need to get kind of a minimally viable product in their hands so that they can begin using it and understand what new features are the highest priority to build out. And lastly, automating the exchange of data among agency systems to provide that unified experience that I mentioned. And that's, those first three steps are kind of necessary to get to that fourth one. But that's the goal that we have for ourselves. The report also finds that increasing the interoperability of systems and the use of shared data are really the most critical steps to achieving that unified experience. And we also hone in on what it takes to successfully develop and implement software. And we identify both the kind of agency approach as well as a future of shared services. So this is where one agency would provide a suite of software tools that could be used by multiple agencies. And there's several examples of that in the federal government. Each agency is not running their own HR system or payroll system. There are particular agency providers of that. And we see opportunity, particularly around like comment analysis and assessment, which is a necessary step for many of the environmental review and permitting processes, where a single agency that is kind of appropriately positioned could invest in and develop tools that could be leveraged by many agencies. So, we now understand kind of what the need for modern technology platforms are, how they can provide agency staff and applicants and the public with the functions laid out in the NEPA provision in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. We also recognize that ultimately we need a unified permitting and NEPA experience for those three groups, but we recognize that there are stumbling blocks or potential hurdles to achieving that. And so part of the report focuses on what are successful software delivery practices. One of which is using agile decision making. So something that's rather common in the private sector in Silicon Valley, but it prioritizes collaboration and adapting to changing needs during the development of software rather than following a rigid process and adhering to predetermined outcomes. So giving yourself the ability to modify course as you learn more about what's needed. And on that note, like what is needed, user-centered design is a concept that is also very prevalent in the technology space. And the core principle there is that successful software is software that is used by the by your end users. And if you may create a tool that the designers think is exactly the right fit, but it really needs to serve the needs of the folks that are on the front lines of the process. And that includes applicants, federal agency staff, and the public. So figuring out how you can bake this user-centered design approach into the development of your tools to achieve whatever your outcome is. So we've got some recommendations on that. And one side note there, I think Mario mentioned the permitting dashboard, which has been around since I think 2011, 2012, and was codified in the Fast 41 process in the Fixing America Surface Transportation Act in 2015. And it's a very helpful tool at kind of daylighting information and tracking. But where I think that it falls short is it hasn't been integrated into the daily workflow of the agency staff, right? So while we have a dashboard that helps with the transparency side, it's not as though agency staff are doing their environmental reviews in a tool that feeds into that. And so instead it becomes this swivel chair exercise where every Friday afternoon, you have to go do the data entry to avoid, falling behind on tracking there. And we see a vision where we're building tools that agency staff, it helps them do their job, so they want to use the tool. And then as they're using that tool, we can pull information from it to feed into the various tracking systems that we need to have situational awareness on project reviews. Next step is, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, continuous iterative development. So software is not a one-time investment, right? If you treat it as, okay, we're going to invest, build the tool, and then we're done, we can, pat ourselves in the back and go home, you will not have built the tool that's going to stand the test of time and really continue to deliver benefits. So the successful software projects that we saw were ones that continuously add or improve features. I was chatting with one of the panelists before we started today, and mentioned the one-click feature to buy something on Amazon, right? That was not an initial feature when Amazon launched, right? You had to click through multiple steps in order to put something in your cart, fill out your credit card information, give it your address, and then finally get to the point where the sale had been made. And what they did is they were monitoring users, right? And they realized there was friction in the process, and that they were losing sales because somebody put something in their basket, but then they got distracted by something. Their kid came in the room. They had to go off and do something else. So the idea here is you need that level of attention to what is the user's experience with this tool. And if it's not meeting their needs or there's unnecessary friction in the process, how can we, the development team, add a feature here, remove, a requirement that, or allow you to save your settings, save your address and your credit card, so that you can get through that. So the lesson is that we need this level of continuous development rather than treating the software tools as kind of one-time purchases. And as we build features over time, one thing that's necessary is kind of my last item on the recommendations list is in-house technology expertise. So agencies necessarily rely on the private sector to support their deployment of software, and that's unlikely to change. But what we do recognize is that if agencies don't have in-house expertise, they are unable to kind of adequately review the code that's being developed or the requirements that they're providing to third-party contractors. So evaluating these proposals and serving as advocates for the staff is essential to getting the tools that are ultimately needed by the end users. And there's also some opportunity for really quick development when you have in-house staff that are able to use low-code and no-code tools, and a bit more on that here in a second. So I'm going to mention the main parts of the report in terms of recommendations, both on the substance of where we need to go for improved permitting process, as well as where what the software development techniques that should be applied. We also go into a list of active projects that are underway. So I mentioned we had essentially surveyed the field and saw kind of 8 or 9 different categories of tools that are currently in use, and we kind of detail what some of those current systems are, as well as look at what the future opportunities should be for improving and creating more interconnections with those tools. So a few highlights from that section of the report. I mentioned that the Permitting Council provided $25 million worth of funding. There were also agencies that were already working on their own projects, but we're actively working with about a dozen agencies as they implement these, both to learn lessons, to assist them, and to help them pilot some early versions of the data standards that I discussed. Some of these tools are focused on, quickly categorizing and completing review for actions that require minimal environmental reviews, while others are focused on assisting applicants with submitting necessary information. And two recent examples of NEPA-related software that highlight the value of that in-house expertise that I mentioned earlier, as well as user-centered agile design approaches. One is at the Department of Agriculture's Rural Development, where they identified the need to have more situational awareness and tracking of NEPA reviews for one of their programs. And in just 2 months, with the help of Department of Agriculture's CIO's office, they were able to use a low-code development platform to get a new tracking tool up and running that, 6 weeks into use, had thousands of entries for projects from out in the field. And so I don't think I need to tell anyone that, a 2-month development timeline for federal government to launch and deploy a new system is pretty fast, and an example that we highlight in the report. Another is Department of Energy, their new transmission authorization program, SITAP. They had a kind of pre-application process that they defined in regulation to facilitate their coordination of reviews across all federal agencies. And in the concurrent with the development of that rule, they also worked with a team of developers at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, followed this user-centered agile approach, and were able to deploy an applicant-facing portal where applicants can submit all necessary information for the pre-application process, concurrent with the final rule effective date. So I think that is a really interesting model from my perspective of pairing technology solution with a new rulemaking process, so that you're not simply, continuing to require additional paper-based process, but are instead designing a applicant-facing portal that can assist with compliance with the new rule. And then two other projects, and I know that artificial intelligence is very much a buzz these days. I would note at the outset that if AI-based systems are, running a marathon, we still have some agencies that need to do the 5K program. So I don't think it's a solution for everything, but I do recognize that there's opportunities to leapfrog, and we don't need to avoid, leveraging the newest technology as we're building some more basic capacity. And so two examples here. One is at the Department of Interior, where they're using Permitting Council funds to look at AI-powered analysis of public comments. So I know Mario recalls when we worked on a rulemaking at CEQ, received over 1 million comments. We actually already use some level of technology when federal agencies are analyzing comments for large projects to deduplicate comments, right? Because of those 1 million, they were not all unique. There were various comment, campaigns that led to, maybe 3,000 truly unique comments, and then of the rest, they were by and large somewhat similar. And there's, existing tools, as I mentioned, to do that deduplication. But with the latest technology around large language models, there is even more assistance that can be provided to staff to quickly kind of categorize the different types of comments that are being received so that they can easily and rapidly respond to those. A second tool that leverages AI is being developed by the Department of Energy and the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. The tool is called Policy AI, and it uses a large language model that's being trained on tens of thousands of environmental review documents, and can serve as a test bed that will be used to develop software to augment NEPA and related reviews. So this Policy AI research team is investigating future uses of AI in the NEPA and permitting process. And this includes extracting and organizing kind of existing data. So these documents that, have been completed and in the old days would just be put on a shelf, you can use these tools through natural language processing and search to actually pull out information that's going to be relevant to future reviews, saving time and effort. And they'll also be able to help us as we help them kind of structure data that's in these reviews. So CEQ is actively working with this team to identify what types of data standards would be most helpful to further structure this data so that we can pull out performance indicators as well as information useful for future reviews. So in addition to these tools that are being developed by individual agency, CEQ has recommended that we look at tools that could be benefited or could benefit multiple agencies across the government. And the key to unlocking these is that we look at first at connecting agency systems and having this standardized data approach. So that's something that we are currently working on. And in addition to being able to kind of push information to and from different agencies involved in a particular review, it'll kind of lay the groundwork for what I mentioned earlier in terms of shared services where we can leverage one system for multiple agencies' needs. Whether that's a cooperating agency that needs to also review a project or sharing information about public comment periods, public hearings, or taking applicant-submitted data and ensuring that it doesn't need to be submitted multiple times. And one last thing as I close is to note that, in order to take full advantage of some of the opportunities in the artificial intelligence space, we really need to improve the way that we structure our data and as well as metadata about projects. When we were in a paper-based environment, I think it was less essential that we do that, and agency practice diverged, somewhat significantly. Ultimately, all the agencies are complying with the same laws, but some of the terminology and some of the data fields that they capture and how they do or do not tag that data is quite different. And I mentioned the DOE policy AI tool. Right now, they're trying to mine through essentially these, quote unquote, dumb PDF documents, right, that don't have a lot of metadata associated with them. And one area that we're actively working on is trying to make the content of these environmental reviews more accessible by machine learning. And it's not actually, from a technological perspective, not that difficult, but it does require kind of changing current practice so that the data that's in these documents, which, midway through a review, when you've got environmental consultants and agency staff analyzing these projects, they have a very rich GIS environment that they're looking at project impacts. But at the end of the day, current practice is to kind of flatten that down to a PDF or paper document. If we can capture the data-rich environment, then that will facilitate future AI use of that data in a much more robust way than mining existing PDFs, which is slower and less accurate. So by developing these data and metadata standards, we're both able to assist with some of the most, some of the low-hanging fruit that will yield the biggest benefit in the short term, while also setting ourselves up for a future where we can leverage even more sophisticated tools to facilitate the process. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing from the panel here in a minute. Thank you.
Thank you. We mic'd up? Great. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike, for that important report, important work. I just want to open by giving a personal note. While you all were watching college football on Saturday, I sustained a somewhat significant non-football injury and was actually listed as questionable for today's game, but I'm trying to get through it. Coughing will be particularly painful, and also please don't make...
This is not a funny subject, Mario. We will not make you laugh.
Luckily, the comic potential of digital tools for NEPA is somewhat limited compared to its other benefits. I did want to, give a shout out to this very important work that Mike Drummond has undertaken, and one that hopefully Congress will be taking a close look at, and the next administration will take a close look at and build on in the years ahead. I also want to, we're joined by, Mike mentioned his colleague Jordan Eccles, who's a Presidential Innovation Fellow. If you ever want to see what it's like to dramatically lower the average IQ of a room by just walking into it, you should go to one of these parties. That happened to me during the time I was at the White House. Really the most brilliant group of people I've ever been around. These are the best minds at Microsoft and Facebook and so forth. Come over and spend a year with the federal government, get dispersed throughout federal agencies to solve problems that are often a lot dumber than they were probably expecting, but that are serious problems that affect people's lives. And so if you can support, and if you're in a position potentially to join and apply to be a Presidential Innovation Fellow, that's a really great program. And so thank you, Jordan, for joining us and for the work that you do. I want to introduce my panelists. First of all, myself, I'm Mario Loyola. I'll be moderating and also opening with some further comments. I'm a fellow here at the Heritage Foundation in the Center for Energy, Climate and Environment. I was at the White House Council on Environmental Quality as Associate Director for Regulatory Reform. I also teach environmental law and administrative law at Florida International University. To my immediate left is Javier Sancho Velázquez, who's the head of innovation and global issues in the delegation of the European Union. Diana Furchtgott-Roth is the director of the Center for Energy, Climate, and Environment here at Heritage. And Drew Bond is the co-founder and president of C3 Solutions. And I look forward to hearing comments from each of you and then having some follow-up questions and potentially questions from the audience. I just want to make a couple of observations about the Digital Tools Report and the promise that I think this effort has. One of them, you heard Mike talk about how these data management systems and the workflow systems at each of these agencies are independent and have evolved independently. I think that one of the challenges is that a one-size-fits-all government solution has many, many downsides. And we want to develop an ecosystem where you have sort of interagency competition to see who can develop the best data management system and workflow system while making them interoperable. And so that's why I think the idea of developing a common data taxonomy is so important. And this is something that we devoted many, many hours of conversation to even during the Trump administration, many years before work started on this report, in our collaboration with the Office of Management and Budget. But there is another potential here as we try to integrate these different workflows in the data sphere, which is that one of the biggest problems that you run into as a project proponent trying to get a pump storage hydropower project developed in California, or a solar project developed, or an LNG facility permitted somewhere, is that if you need different, you will need permits from different agencies. The agencies are doing a dramatic reenactment of the Tower of Babel in many cases, and from the project proponent's point of view, they speak different languages, they have different systems, they often don't talk to each other. The position of independent agencies like FERC is that they have ex parte proceedings in which they're not even allowed to talk to each other. And so what you have is a problem of interdependency. So the Forest Service is telling me that I need FERC to give me something, but FERC is saying that it can't do something until the Forest Service does something first, and you can get caught in this. I mean, these are like, these catch-22s are really spectacular. They can be solved with a single sentence in a memorandum, but a year or two can be lost because of the effort to go back and forth between these different permit processes. And what we'll see, hopefully, and hear from Javier a little bit about, and others on the panel too, to address this, is that where systems are more integrated, for example, there are countries in Europe that have a one-stop shop permitting agency and a single process. This is really a much smoother system that benefits everybody and reduces the transaction costs and the administrative costs for this. And this is hopefully something where we're headed here in the United States towards one-stop shop permitting and a single unified application, which I would say to my friends on the Hill to look carefully at FAST 41 as the sort of embryo of something that could, the permitting council under FAST 41, FIPSI, as the embryo of what could be eventually a one-stop shop permitting system for at least projects of national importance. And I'll just mention at this point, I mentioned projects of national importance, projects that represent and advance significant policy priorities of the government. This whole idea that that the public has an interest in nationally important projects, you almost cannot find this idea anywhere in the permitting system of the United States. I would submit that the permitting system of the United States has systematically subordinated projects of national importance and the public interest in projects of national importance to politically concentrated pressure groups around the country who are often just anti-development and are going to oppose development anywhere. It's an example of something that Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I remember saying after living in New England for many years in exile, said that whereas in the Soviet Union it's necessary to protect the individual from the state, in the United States it's often necessary to protect the state from the individual. And this is an example where I think really shows that Solzhenitsyn was right in some ways. Another aspect that I want to mention where there's significant promise in the digital tools report is, as I mentioned earlier in my opening, the problem of unquantifiable uncertainty is very serious because if going back to Frank Knight, and hopefully some of the economists here on the panel will have more to say about this, but the idea that if Frank Knight's insight that if risk can be quantified, it can be insured against, and if it can be insured against, then it also has access to debt financing. This is an important insight for permitting of infrastructure because to the extent that the permitting risk, this is, by the way, a term that I think should gain currency in these debates, to the extent that the enormous risk of the permitting process from the investor's point of view is not quantifiable, we know that this must have an impact on capital costs, and we know that it also must have an impact on the availability of capital for these projects. And I would submit that there is more than enough capital in the private economy of the United States to fund all the infrastructure projects that we need without a single dollar of subsidy from Congress. If the federal government would just get out of the way and if the federal government could reform its system that creates needless impenetrable risk from the point of view of investors, needlessly unpredictable system. And so making at least the process, allowing the public and the investing public to have access to more data about what happens to projects that enter pre-application, what happens to projects after they've completed all of the enormously expensive resource reports that are required to satisfy pre-clearing criteria at any of these agencies. Do they ever get their permits? And we know from an important proxy, I would say, is the interconnection queue, which you can see live here at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratories annual report on the interconnection queue. This is the projects that are lining up to seek interconnection agreements, power plant projects that are lining up to seek interconnection to the electricity grid. This is often an element of, you need a preliminary project permit to get on the or a preliminary project permit application to get on the interconnection queue. The interconnection queue, being on the interconnection queue is often a condition of getting down the road in the permitting process itself. And what do we see? We see that on the interconnection queue currently, there are 1.4, 1.5 terawatts of solar. Just solar alone is 1.4, 1.5 terawatts. That's more than the entire existing electrical capacity of the United States right now. People put a lot of stock in this, but the fact of the matter is that very few of these projects are ever going to be built. Less than 10% or 15% or something are ever going to be built. That's historical numbers, with the Inflation Reduction Act supercharging the number of projects that are winding up on the interconnection queue. That percentage is liable to go down. We've seen Governor Shapiro just in the last month. Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania sent off another, somewhat angry letter to PJM, the regional transmission organization that covers Virginia, Pennsylvania, and some of these other states, saying you need to be processing these applications for interconnection more rapidly. But PJM is not the holdup, right? PJM is the holdup is the permitting process writ large, and I should say the ways in which the Inflation Reduction Act itself has really distorted the economics of investment in this sector. One frightening thing, incidentally, about the interconnection queue is that there is almost no natural gas or nuclear on the interconnection queue. And that is, why is that? Good discussion, subject for another panel, maybe another event. But it's a very serious problem because with forecasts for demand soaring and increasingly clear constraints on the ability of the electricity grid to keep up with that demand, we're headed for a significant electricity scarcity crisis. Permitting reform will have to be an enormously important part of that, of solving that problem. Digital tools for NEPA will have to be an important part of solving that problem. And so I hope that that's something that we can bring into the discussion. I'll close by noting that in the month before I joined Heritage Foundation last summer, I finished a survey of global infrastructure best practices, where I went around to looked at various European Union countries, at the European Union itself, as a superstructure, Australia, New Zealand, China, Japan, and tried to figure out who's got kind of the best system for the most predictable system, the least cost system, most efficient system for permitting. And I came away with a couple of conclusions, one of which is that efficient permitting is a major dimension is a major factor in your global competitiveness. And the fact that the United States has maybe the world's least efficient system of permitting and environmental review is a major competitive disadvantage compared to other countries, and one that we need to move quickly to ameliorate. And I would say that the entire debate in the United States, certainly when I was at CEQ in the White House, and from what I know of the debate on Capitol Hill, the entire debate, even among the policy experts, is taking place without reference to what other countries are doing. And I would say that it's very important to look at what other countries are doing, because this is very much an area of international competition. And the ability to deliver infrastructure projects is a major dimension of international competition. And so looking at other countries is an important aspect of this. So with that, I think that's a good segue to turn to Javier and and I'll have a question for you along these lines, but please take it away.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, good morning to everybody. To my fellow panelists, to you, Mario, thank you so much. Michael, thank you for doing the heavy lifting today. And to those online also listening. My name is Javier Sancho, as Mario was saying. We have too many names, Javier Sancho would do. We have many names because we pay tribute to the mother. That's the second last name. But I'm here representing the delegation of the European Union to the United States of America. And I am the head of the Global Issues and Innovation section, which includes energy, which is so dear to you, and but many other areas like transportation, research and innovation, but also space and environmental issues and biodiversity. It's an array of issues. And if you allow me, Mario, I think that, well, first of all, this is one of these issues which, as you said, at first sight, it looks like very technical, like many other themes and matters which are very technical, but indeed they lie now at the very heart of geopolitics and politics as well. So these issues which were discussed by experts not long ago now are in the tables of prime ministers and ministers and international summits because they are really critical. And because of that, I think it is important to, I feel the need to give you some context because we are at the dawn of a new political cycle here in the US following the elections, but also in the European Union, we are at the very beginning of a new political cycle. Actually, the new commission started, European Commission is one of the main players in the European Union, started its work 2 days ago. So I cannot say exactly what is it that the European Commission is going to propose, what the European Council is going to approve and negotiate with the Parliament, which is our extremely complex structure. But I can say that there are political guidelines already published by the President von der Leyen, and also what we call in EU Parliament's mission letters to the commissioners, the new commissioners, for their tasks and jobs, and how they. So there is a clear indication of the political guidance, and this issue is there. So things are changing and evolving. We have former Prime Minister of Italy, Draghi, issuing a very important report about competitiveness. So we feel the pressing need to move very quickly to make sure that we remain and we are more competitive. And this, again, technical issue that we are discussing today is at the very heart of those proposals. And not long ago, our political leaders were together in Budapest, in Hungary. We are now under the Hungarian presidency of the European Union. And they adopted a declaration, the Budapest Declaration, about the new European competitiveness deal, as they call it. And I would like just, with your permission, to read what they said. Item number 4, one of the things they said we need to do quickly is launching a simplification revolution, ensuring a clear, simple, and smart regulatory framework for businesses, and drastically reducing administrative, regulatory, and reporting burdens, in particular for SMEs. We must adopt an enabling mindset based on trust, allowing business to flourish without excessive regulation, and the key objectives to be implemented by the Commission without delay include making concrete proposals on reducing reporting requirements by at least 25% in the first half of 2025, and including red tape and competitiveness impact assessments in its proposals. This is, of course, it's a declaration of intent, is what it is. But this is adopted at the highest political level in the European Union. And if you add to that my reference to the political guidelines that von der Leyen has already made public, I think there will be, as she said very rightly, it's not about changing the laws because the content is important, it's about how we implement it. And permitting is key. So from the delegation, we have been following very closely the bipartisan effort you mentioned before, Mario. And I have to say that reading the papers before coming here to join this panel and listening to Michael, many, or I would say most of the issues that I read in our papers were mentioned by Michael, which is to a certain extent logical. You have an issue, you have to circumvent the issue, most of the time try to solve it, and for that you need technical knowledge, you need expertise. And when it comes about digital tools, of course, we have some time afterwards, I would like to mention a few points about that. But harnessing artificial intelligence requires not only political guidance, requires expertise. You cannot implement a more efficient permitting system if those who are going to be in charge of that don't know how to do it. So this is a very important, but most of the issues you mentioned, Michael, are in the papers that I was trying to learn from before coming to here. So that means that we feel the same pressing need to act quickly, because without these, with these bottlenecks, we will not be able to be as competitive as we need to be. Now, a word about our system now. As I said before, this system is going to be radically impacted by these changes. Most of them will be happening in 2025. So it's going to be as expeditious as possible. But I would like to say a word about the directives, which actually our current system, the one which needs to be reviewed and reformed. And we are in the EU parlance, again, we have directives and regulations, and you know better than me, actually. And these directives are to be implemented by member states. So they are mandatory, but it's up to member states, to each of the 27 European Union member states, to implement these things. And there are regulations which are directly implemented in each and every member state. And for this directive, of course, imagine you have problems here, interagency problems. So imagine on top of that, having 27 sovereign entities discussing permits. It's time consuming, and you need to touch upon so many different issues that I believe it will take some time. However, if, as I said before, the political impetus that this new commission intends to give to this kind of reform is transformed into real action, which I think will happen because of the geopolitical context again, I think that long road will be not that long, and I think we'll be able to see some real results very soon, including, for instance, the omnibus legislation for reporting, corporate reporting, the taxonomy as well for energy, and which is going to be very complex technically, not only politically, because what I said before about the difference between directives and regulations, these are different legislative tools. And to merge that into an omnibus piece of legislation is going to be extremely complicated. And on top of that, you need 27 sovereign states negotiating among themselves with the Commission, and then with the 700 and so members of the European Parliament representing 450 million people. So as you can imagine, it's not going to be an easy exercise. But what we are getting from the new political leadership is this is urgent, we need to do it now. So after, if you allow me, I would like to, because I don't want to monopolize the floor, I would like to talk a little bit about how we see this reform, and also to take about other interesting digital tools that we can discuss. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Javier.
Sorry. Thank you.
Diana?
Mario, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today, and thanks to all the speakers on our panel and to you, Michael, for your report. I was in the Trump administration as acting Assistant Secretary for Economic Policy in the Treasury Department, and also as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology in the Transportation Department. And permitting was very, very important. I've been asked to speak about the economic perspective, and I can tell you it is really vital. The United States government has a system of checks and balances, and we have done very well throughout our history, the short history of the United States, with these checks and balances, because it prevents very bad bills from passing, but it also prevents good bills from passing and good projects from passing. And in the Trump administration, we had an initiative called One Federal Decision that Mario had something to do with. That was basically guidance from the president to try to get all the decision-making within one agency. Well, it didn't really work. And then the same provision was put into law in the Infrastructure Act. And again, that didn't really work. And the problem is that capital is a coward. Capital runs at the first sign of uncertainty. And it's so much of a coward that then it doesn't come back again. So there's tremendous economic problems when it comes to uncertainty. And you can see this in practice when President Trump just won the election, And all of a sudden, stock markets boomed because there was a certain amount of certainty associated with what was going to happen over the next 4 years. Well, a book that I wrote that was published in 2006 called Overcoming Barriers to Entrepreneurship in the United States looked at various measures, various factors that contributed to uncertainty. And I looked at taxes, I looked at labor laws, I looked at wages. Well, it turns out that for entrepreneurs, the biggest problem is unpredictability, uncertainty. And that swamps all these other things. When I started out writing the book, I thought that the biggest problem would be taxes because that would increase cost. Well, no, I was wrong. Taxes are predictable, so you can build it into the price of a product. Higher minimum wages, higher labor rates, more regulations for labor, you can build that into the price of the project. But uncertainty over regulations, not knowing when all of a sudden something is going to come down and hit you, that is very, very detrimental for entrepreneurs. That's why countries where expropriation is common find it harder to get investors. And we have entities such as the World Bank that lends to countries no matter what their situation is, but private lenders will not lend. And it's often been suggested that it would be helpful for these countries' governance systems if the World Bank and other international organizations just simply pulled back, because then they would have to put in place a system of governance that would attract private capital. And that would mean getting rid of expropriation, putting in place property rights, giving certainty to investors. There's a proposed bill in South Africa that would allow expropriation without compensation. This bill has passed the Assembly, and it's now on the desk of President Ramaphosa awaiting his signature. And there have been a lot of groups that have lobbied against it because it would reduce investment in South Africa, which is already beginning to be a somewhat fragile economy. So these efforts of expropriation that have also been in place in Venezuela are still common in countries that do need that private capital. And so it's completely contrary to their self-interest to have these bills, and yet these bills are put forward. The economic literature and studies are also very clear about this. Frank Knight, the Chicago economist, was the first one to say that uncertainty makes it so that some decisions hold more risks and are less attractive to investors. There was a study from the European Investment Bank on the effect of uncertainty in investment. And they find that uncertainty has a significant negative effect on investment as well as on employment. There are studies on uncertainty from COVID, where authors investigated the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And they found out that the effect of changes in the pandemic, changes in expected revenue forecasts, had little to no effect, but changes in uncertainty was the most significant factor in investors' decisions. So the academic literature and real life and common sense all line up together, and we do need to fix this permitting process.
Thank you, Diana. Drew?
Yeah, so well said, Diana. And Mario, thank you for having me here today. And Michael, well done on your paper. I read it as thorough as possible, so you guys have researched this well. So a little bit of background about me, and it's just really kind of a delight to be here. I have done many things in my career. I'm a serial entrepreneur. One of the things I'm most proud of is I got to be chief of staff at the Heritage Foundation for Ed Fulner in 2001 to 2004. And actually my first startup was townhall.com, which at the time was a little website inside of Heritage that we spun out and eventually became part of a publicly traded company called Salem Communications. I've since done a number of things, primarily in the energy space. And so when I first got asked to be on this panel, I thought, what do I know about digitization of permitting? But I know a fair amount about permitting in projects and capital. And so let me start with maybe, so I wear two hats currently. One is C3 Solutions, as I was introduced as the co-founder and CEO of. C3 Solutions, C3 actually stands for the Conservative Coalition for Climate Solutions. And we were founded on the premise that the narrative on climate had gone far too left, far too extreme. And no matter what you think about climate change, ultimately the best results, the best outcome that we're gonna have 100, 200, 300 years from now are gonna be based on free markets and competition and having affordable access to abundant, cleanest as possible energy. And so we really wanted to change the narrative to say, yes, climate's changing, but no, the sky's not falling, and we can actually solve this problem with more innovation and practical policy solutions. And so one of the reports that we write, we're a 501c3 think tank, so we meet with members of Congress. We work with coalition groups across the spectrum. So while we're expressly conservative, we work with groups left, center, and right, and find common ground where we can. And one of the kind of landmark reports that we write on an annual basis is called "Free Economies Are Clean Economies." And so, taking a little bit of a page from my heritage playbook, we thought about this problem a little bit in terms of, well, if you want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions globally, you've got to think globally. And so how do you actually expand economic freedom for the countries that need it the most and help people rise out of poverty so that they can be in a better position to care for the environment? So we took the Index of Economic Freedom from the Heritage Foundation, which has been in publication for almost 30 years, and then the Yale University Environmental Performance Index. And both of those indices have a whole host of other indices that they pull data from. But we found it to be interesting. Take Heritage, conservative organization, Yale, arguably liberal, left of center organization. What does the data show about the environment and economic freedom? So lo and behold, it finds that free economies are clean economies. And in fact, free economies are twice as clean as unfree economies. So I'll say that again. Free economies are twice as clean as unfree economies. And then one of the key factors in the Heritage Index of Economic Freedom, they talk about tax burden, they talk about size of government, they talk about the federal debt, they talk about regulatory efficiency. And so this is where the uncertainty that Diana's talking about is really key. Regulatory efficiency really does stop these projects from happening. And I'll get into a couple examples there if I can. But so just, interesting note, the forward for our Free Economies report, we had launched the first time with a friend, Liam Fox, a longtime conservative member of parliament and was an aide to Margaret Thatcher. Second year, the forward was written by Ed Fulner, the founder of the Heritage Foundation and longtime president and friend. And last year happened to be this guy named Chris Wright, who is the nominee for Energy Secretary. And so I would just encourage you to go read that report, read Chris's forward. I didn't know that he was going to be the nominee for secretary. I'd like to tell you I did, but I didn't. But I certainly believe that Chris is going to be a great nominee, and I think partially because of this issue on permitting reform. Because anyone that's been in the energy space for the last 3 decades, we've been talking about permitting reform forever. And there's a million reasons why you can't get it done, but eventually, where we are today, thankfully, I think the environmental community is finally speaking out in favor of permitting reform. And if there's one president that can actually get something done on permitting reform, I think it's President Trump. And especially with Chris Wright at the Department of Energy, with Governor Burgum at the Interior Department, and with Lee Zeldin at the EPA. If those three, under President Trump's leadership, could do nothing else but cut the red tape and accelerate the time to permit American energy in America, we will have done more than we've done in a very long time for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and the environment in the US and in the world. And so, I'd love to talk about some projects, examples. I don't want to talk too long, but if I have a couple more minutes, or I can wait for your questions.
We've got just 13 minutes left in the event, and I do want to get to audience questions. So let me come back at you with a question for each of the panelists that I think will give you a chance to go into some of that. One of the insights that I came away with, and thank you, Drew. One of the insights that I came away with from my study of global best practices is that in Europe, in the European Union, they do things quite differently because oftentimes these major infrastructure projects are government-led projects in the sense that the project proposal begins life as part of a strategic planning process at the government level. And so actually, when the German government says, the German government will start by saying, we want a wind project there on the map, and we want it to produce this much electricity, and you need to be able to start by January of 2026, and then that's the RFP, and then if you're the winning bid, you get the permit, right? And they've worked this all out in advance. Here in the United States, we have a much more applicant-driven process where the applicant says, says, we'd like to put a power plant here that produces this much power, and they get, varying degrees of warmth or frigidity at the government agency that is receiving their application. Oftentimes, they get no answer at all. And so these are very different systems, and how do we get to, one question that I have is how we can get to a system in the United States that can execute, and does the government need to be more involved in a way, right? We want to get the government out of the infrastructure business as much as possible. We especially want to get government money out of the infrastructure business as much as possible. But does there need to be an element of government planning in order to be able to issue permits quickly and deploy infrastructure quickly? And so in the European Union, there is, in addition, I'll have it as part of the Environmental Impact Assessment Directive, the European Commission requires that each of the member states collect data about project applications and what happens to them, how many get their permits, how long they take to get their permits. This is a very important element of data collection that I hope will be somewhat convergent with the digital tools effort in the United States. So laying out a couple of those pieces of the puzzle, what are the lessons from your point of view and how the European Union is able to deploy infrastructure quickly, not always wisely, as the Germans have found out, and what the United States can do to pick up some of those best practices? And I would have the same question for each of you.
So telegraphically, we have two directives actually regarding environmental assessments in the EU for infrastructure projects. One is called, as you mentioned, the Environmental Impact Assessment Directive. The other one is called a Strategic Environmental Assessment Directive. And the difference is that the first one is for individual projects, and the second one is for, as you said, when there is a regional strategy in one member state and a project is just part of that. And I think that that's the first thing. I think it will be important to distinguish between individual projects and more strategic or program projects. I think that if you allow me, regarding the renewable energy, because I think it's very important for us in terms of energy security, we need to invest on renewable energy. And of course, it's not a good business to get rid of one dependency to fall into another one. So we need to develop our own capacity there. But in terms of lessons learned and things we are trying to do, there is this another directive that we have put forward about renewable energy, and it's setting clear time limits. I think that's useful, and because we are very ambitious, we need to be very pragmatic here. So time limits for permit granting procedures, that's one element. Also mandates a single contact point for applicants to prevent parallel processes going on. And the phase out of paper-based communication, which is a small element, but very, very important in terms of efficiency, not just because we don't want to use paper all the time. Also a more strategic approach to spatial planning. And this is something I would like to dwell on for a minute. Spatial planning means that there are specific areas, geographical areas. Malaga, for instance. We were talking about Malaga before, a great place. And Malaga happens to be one of these spatial areas where onshore wind farms are going to be located. And the issue here with the spatial thing is that they are, they don't need to go through the whole procedure. They get access to very expeditious process where most of these things are override is it what you can say in English?
Override local regulations.
By the authorities. So this is also a very political tool which has to do with we need this renewable energy plant here, we make it happen quickly and is legally possible. So this is one of the ideas I wanted to share. I think that when we are like-minded, when we are trying to solve a problem, we come from maybe different perspectives, but we end up trying to find a solution for that problem. And exchanging lessons learned is critically important. There are regulations which are extremely complicated from a technical viewpoint, and you have pen holders in many places trying to write something similar. If this person has access to the technical, the pen holder, I'm talking about politicians here, I'm talking about the person who is there writing the first draft and say, I did that because we thought that and that, I think that that will be extremely important and conducive to very quick results. Thank you.
Thank you. Diana, just in a minute.
Well, I think the United States is a special case. We have more checks and balances. We have more litigation. Even if we were to solve this on the federal level, there are still states, groups within states, group within counties, tribes that can bring lawsuits to stop projects from happening. And I'd like to borrow an idea from one of my favorite colleagues that people who sue to stop these projects should have to put up a bond, and there should be a version of loser pays. So if their lawsuit loses, then they have to pay, and this is drawn on the bond that they have put up. And that will discourage unnecessary lawsuits, just as in the UK, there's a loser pays principle for lawsuits. And then in some other countries, if a project has not been decided within a period of 2 years or so, then it automatically goes forward. That helps move these decisions forward. But it's a very complicated system in the United States put out with the best of intentions to stop government from overriding individual rights. But it also has negative effects, and we need to be creative as to how we overcome some of these effects. And by the way, that favorite colleague who suggested posting the bond, he's sitting over there, Mario Leone.
I like that idea. Yeah, I think, look, I could tell you example after example of projects that didn't get funded, that companies that didn't become scale because they realized it was going to take 2 years to get a project done. And so, give me a yes or a no today. Don't give me a maybe for 2 years, because the most expensive thing that you've got in terms of an entrepreneur is not the cost of capital, it's the cost of time. And so I would throw out a couple of ideas. One is, categorical exclusions. We have a significant amount of land holdings at the Department of Defense bases, military bases, and national labs. And something, DoD bases, depending on what you turn up in your Google search, is somewhere around 30 million acres. National labs, I couldn't tell exactly, but maybe 5 or 6 million acres. These are lands that don't have stakeholders except their federal agencies. We should be issuing a categorical exclusion to deploy small modular reactors, enhanced geothermal. You could throw in solar plus batteries, but make sure it's supply chain secure, and natural gas, truly an all the above and below approach. President Trump could do that on day one. The agencies have that authority. The Department of Energy has the authority over the national labs. DoD has the authority over the bases. We're not talking about giving up land. We're talking about better utilizing land and hopefully also producing revenue back to the taxpayers. So that would be one thing. The other would be a categorical exclusion for demonstration projects. And this idea came from a friend of mine who's a venture capitalist. I mean, think about it like, I have to simplify this in my mind. I took my 15-year-old to get his learner's permit recently, right? He studied for the test, he took the test, and now he's got his learner's permit, right? You should get a technology learner's permit like that, because that period of time is really risky for a lot of reasons. And then to get your further permit, then start the process then, and if it takes a year or whatever, hopefully it'd be less, but we ought to be able to permit these things quickly. And I go back to my earlier point, American energy is the cleanest energy in the world. And so why are we spending all this time, years after years after years, wasting on the processes? And and the digitization is great. Kudos to you for your work, but can we just make this stuff happen finally? I mean, we're competing against China, and they don't have the blessings and the curses of democracy.
Thank you. So thank you all for that. Hopefully we have a few minutes here still for questions. Anybody in the audience have a question before we go to questions from online? Do we have a question online, Andrew? Yeah.
This is from Mark Jensen. Since the passage of NEPA over 50 years ago, we have seen benefits from reduced pollution and increased assessment of potential environmental damage from industrial development. But the increased regulations have also come with great cost. How do we strike a balance between environmental protection for both nature and humans while addressing cost impacts?
So happy to hear from each of the panelists on that. I'll just say that this is, here's the strongest argument for why there should be bipartisan consensus on all this stuff. A lot of environmental regulations involve the trade-off that Mr. Jensen describes. But this doesn't, right? Because here what you're talking about is just this cloud of uncertainty over the process that is purely a result of inefficiency in the process, and it doesn't benefit anybody except for local groups that are able to manipulate, local small groups of opposition that are able to manipulate this process to amplify their impact and effectively subordinate the national interest and the public interest to the point where it's just a heckler's veto. And there are very few beneficiaries from that system. So you could enhance, there are many environmentally beneficial projects that don't get done because of permitting uncertainty. And so you could actually, if you fix this, you could enhance environmental protection and economic activity with beneficiaries across the board.
Okay, I can say a few words. I mean, this question is the most difficult one because this is exactly what we are all trying to do. We need to protect the interests of our citizens, but also our businesses. We have to make sure that the playing field is level. We need to protect also our resources. The difference between us and us, meaning European Union member states and the United States, is that, I mean, lucky for you, you have the riches underground here. You have a different debate. We need to bring this gas, LNG, from the US more and more, happily. But it's a very complicated question. I think that our directive is also 40 years old. So this is not just something that is not a new discussion. We have been talking about this for a long time. And it is obvious that we have not been very efficient in solving the issue. But I believe that the essence of having an environmental assessment is precisely to avoid, Diana was saying before, litigation. I mean, to tackle the problem before the problem actually has a negative impact on the project itself. But of course, if you have an excess of regulation and red tape, it defeats the purpose. So the question is extremely difficult. My answer is extremely clumsy, but I believe that there is possible to strike the right balance. In that sense, what is called here bipartisanship, also in our political system, the fact that different opinions coming from different ideological backgrounds converge in an efficient solution to a problem which affects all. That's I think, the only way we can move forward and do it quickly.
Yeah, and I would say that Arthur Laffer, I remember, had a op-ed in the Wall Street Journal many years ago where he laid out how for every dollar that the IRS receives in federal income taxes, the public is spending $1.30 or $1.40 to comply with the revenue code. This is a catastrophic loss that's just purely due to inefficiency in the tax code. People should know how many losses, what is the scale of the social loss being imposed just because of the inefficiency in these government programs that don't have any beneficiary, really. Diana, what about that? What about just the deadweight loss of these government programs?
Well, we can see that the United States government has taken 66 actions in Alaska just in President Biden's term in order to reduce development of critical minerals, oil and natural gas exploration in Alaska. And especially when it comes to the critical minerals off the coast, we find other countries in the Arctic region that are accessing those, and this is tremendously damaging. As you said, Javier, we are fortunate that we have immense natural resources in our country, but we're also fortunate that we have a system of governance where private individuals own what is under their feet and not just the land. In many countries, people own the land, yes, but they don't own what is under their feet, so they don't even have the right to get it out. So we have the right to get it out, but again, this permitting process needs to be overcome, and it's especially important that we do that.
And Drew, what about that trade-off?
Yeah, I mean, I just think, I go back, sorry to be a broken record, but I mean, economic freedom leads to a cleaner environment, and we've proved that here in the United States, but not just in the United States, but even many of our European, allies. And so if you look at, if you're, from an environmental perspective, if you're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as fast as possible, well, we did it using natural gas through the fracking revolution, right? And if the regulatory red tape had gotten in the way of that, then we would be still beholden to the Middle East for our oil, and in a very different energy, geopolitical situation.
And still burning coal.
It's still burning coal. So, I again tend to think we can have our cake and eat it too, from the respect of, like, we need more energy, not less. It will be cleaner and cleaner over time because the innovation that we have today and the innovation that's being developed for tomorrow will absolutely get us there. And so we really just need the government to get out of the way in many of the cases.
Katie, do we have time for one more question from online? Do we have another question from online, Andrew?
Okay, we have
great.
one in the room.
Question.
Hi, Stuart Dwyer. Started working with a Danish company called Seabrain that has been very successful in working with the Danish EPA on permitting technology. Enough for the ad, but I wanted to ask any thoughts on some of the reforms that are currently being discussed in Congress, and is there a digital angle to those, or is there an opportunity to solve some of the problems that Michael alluded to in terms of data sharing and other things?
Well, so I without having a great amount of visibility or claiming to know where those discussions are in Congress, I will point out that there is news stories today about how lawmakers are looking increasingly at the reconciliation process for permitting reform straight out of the gate in the new Congress. That means that under parliamentary rules, these are permitting reforms that could be characterized as revenue-raising measures so that they could get into a package. Of many elements of H.R. 1, which certain aspects of which became the NEPA amendments in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, are along the lines that you suggested. And the Digital Tools Report itself arose from an amendment to NEPA that was in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and it's hopefully iterative. I mean, one thing that the Fiscal Responsibility Act mandate for this report didn't mention was making this data publicly accessible in the aggregate, right? mean, it specifically mentions, the Fiscal Responsibility Act specifically mentions allowing individuals to track the progress of individual permit applications, but the public should have access to all of this data in the aggregate to see in a particular office of BLM or of Army Corps of Engineers, what's the status of permit applications across, how many permit applications have finished pre-clearing? How many of them do they expect to process this year? This is very important data that hopefully when Congress takes a look at this in the new Congress, we'll be looking to build on this in the years ahead.
So I just wanted to throw out, an idea. I'd love maybe to talk to Michael about this, because I know different agencies have different technologies, and sometimes for good reasons, sometimes maybe not. So I also have a solar company. We track our projects in development just simply using Salesforce, right? And so you get a lead and you turn it into an opportunity, and then you turn that opportunity into put the probability, you put an end date on it, and eventually you either win it or lose it. And literally you can look at it, as a pipeline, you can look at it as a funnel. I don't know what the right software is, but I feel like we're making this too hard. If you had a Salesforce for project development and put reminders back to Congress on all the projects that are 30 days past due, then maybe we would put the right pressure on the system to get stuff done.
Yeah, great. I think we're out of time, Katie, probably. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to my fellow panelists for a great panel. Hopefully the start of many more discussions in the months and years ahead. Thank you all for coming to Heritage. What?
Mario, we don't need to have more discussions in the years ahead. We're going to solve it this year, right?
Well, as Daniel Patrick Moynihan said once on This Week with David Brinkley or whatever, life is incremental, and thank God, because I couldn't take much more. So with that, thank you all very much, and happy holidays.
Thanks.
Thank you.